welcome to another episode of Better Gaming, an event and podcast series dedicated to all aspects of ethical gambling as we discuss how to make gambling and gaming safe, secure and socially balanced for everyone. I'm your host, Jim, and in today's episode, we're diving into the world of AI, which typically reads like a modern-day superhero saga of good versus evil. And by that, I mean AI has the ability to be the gambling industry's greatest ally or its most formidable adversary. So in the wrong hands, it could optimize addiction, increase gambling harm, and maximize losses. But when wielded with responsibility, it can become a guardian or a custodian, protecting vulnerable players and ensuring fair play. Today, I'm joined by Paula Murphy, who is the Business Development Manager at Mindway, who, as a company, has positioned itself firmly on the side of good. And for those unaware, Mindway has developed award-winning safer gambling software that combines neuroscience with AI and expert assessments. So, Paula, thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Jim. Thank you. I'm very glad that you made it clear that we're on the side of good here. I was just ready to jump in and do that.
Oh, okay. No, that's fine. I mean, all the narratives around it is good versus bad. So I thought that was pretty fitting for the framing of it. Listen,
Yeah.
It's great to have you on. Now,
It's great to be here, Jim. Thank you.
Brilliant. So building on this superhero theme of good versus evil, and everyone's got an origin story. And I'd like to discuss the origin story of, just to get going, of yourself and Mindway. Can you give us a little bit of background about your experiences and how you ended up at Mindway and within the gambling industry?
Yeah, sure. So I guess that's two stories, right? One is the story of Mindway, and the other is what I'm doing here. So I'll start off with myself, and then I'll move on to the business. So I've been working in the gaming industry for something like 8 years now. I've been at Mindway for about 2.5. And prior to that, I was running my own business, an organization called Know Now, which is a very, very specialized information training and events provider for the compliance and player protection community. And before that, I was one of the managing directors at the Wilmington Group. So amongst a lot of other things, Wilmington are the parent organization of the International Compliance Association. The division that I looked after for Wilmington was actually the legal division, and I don't mean doing their legal work, I mean sort of servicing their legal customers. So what we were doing there, a heavy element of that was compliance, and I kind of witnessed the compliance function over a number of years in the legal profession go from being this kind of back office function to being an area of the business where the people that were working in compliance had a seat on the board, and it became something that was like at the forefront of what they had to consider. And at the time, I could see very much the same thing happening in the gaming industry. I could see that a lot of the same things in terms of mergers, public opinion around the industry, it had the same sort of mix of characteristics as what I'd already experienced with law. So I felt that there was kind of a huge juggernaut coming over the hill, for want of a better word. And I feel like in this industry, it's even more important because of the element of player protection. You're actually dealing with people's lives, and not just the people that are affected with gambling related harm, but their families as well. So I felt it was a move that I really wanted to make. It was an industry that had a real problem, and I wanted to help them solve that problem, basically. So that's how I ended up in this industry. I love it. I've heard so many people say, once you're in gambling, you don't go back. And I subscribe to that wholeheartedly. I think it is a great industry to work in, and I love the people that I work with, both, in Mindway itself, but also all of our partners. I see a lot of people who really, really care about the jobs that they're doing. So that's kind of my background. In terms of Mindway, I joined Mindway about 2.5 years ago. The business is 6 years old. It's actually a really nice story of how the business originated. Mindway is a Danish organization. It was a spin out from Aarhus University in Denmark. And we were founded by a guy called Professor Kim Morrison. And Kim is actually a professor of neuroscience. At the time when the concept of Mindway came into being, he was actually working using a version of the machine learning technology that we use today, but using it in a very different field. So He was working in the field of medical diagnostics with cancer patients, stroke patients, that kind of thing, using the technology to bring back diagnostics to aid the doctors to make sort of very quick decisions around what they needed to do with the patients. And there is a sort of problem gambling clinic that is associated with the university over there. And at the time, I think there was quite a sort of reoccurring conversation. And that conversation sort of centered around the fact that by the time people came through the doors of the clinic looking for treatment, they had always experienced very significant gambling related harm. And there's a lot of research that shows that when somebody is that far down their journey, it is very, very hard to then bring that person back to any kind of sustainable level of play. And really abstinence is the only thing, and they need quite considerable treatment for recovery at that point in time. So they were sort of discussing at the clinic that it would be really great if there was a way that we could spot these signs early on before the player had gone through this journey and developed such a significant issue. And that's where Kim got involved. So it kind of grew out of this clinical need that was identified. And then the idea of using the technology, the machine learning technology, and looking at player data and looking at behavior patterns within that data was what sort of the business grew and sort of spun out of. So what Kim did is he sort of brought together a lot of professionals from all of the different disciplines of understanding gambling related harm. So we draw from psychology, but I think one of the key things about what we do at Mindway is obviously we have this sort of base in neuroscience with Kim and all the work that he's done over the years and his understanding of the sort of the way the human brain works in this space. But then also we have psychologists that are involved in the research side of understanding problem gambling. Critically, we also have psychologists that are involved in the treatment side and that have clinical experience of working with people that have experienced harm. So we draw from all of these different disciplines. We take the player data, we get an understanding of that player data in terms of the patterns that we can see. And that understanding is always going to be contextual, because what we actually do is we train the algorithm to replicate the expert human decision making of the psychologists that we have on our panel. So what you effectively end up with is kind of like having an army of psychologists looking at your player data 24/7, looking for signs of problematic play and filtering your player database by level of risk as the experts would define it. Does that answer the question?
That's a brilliant opener. That is an absolutely brilliant opening, because a really good oversight into Mindway. And one of the things that you kept on referencing there was about the data of player behaviour. Do you get that from the operators and the platforms, or how does that work?
Yeah. So that comes from the operators that we work with. I think something that is really important to say as well, because I'm sure one of the things we're going to touch on, and I know with your opening around the sort of the good and the evil of AI, we can't attribute the data to an individual on our side. So all we know in terms of personal data is kind of the gender and the age of the player. It's all pseudo-anonymized. So there's no sort of concerns around Big Brother is watching you and what is all this information that Mindway has. What we actually then get is the spin level data. So every move that is made on the operator's platform, we get access to that and we can see it, and we can then look at the patterns. So we look at things like financial markers like deposit limits, deposit patterns. We also look at time markers in terms of when people are playing, how long they're playing for. We can also take in data from things around use of safer gambling controls and all these different data sets that we pull together from the operator side that we can then analyze and assess what's going on within that, for that player within that data pattern.
Okay. And so with that, keep it on the good theme. How do you measure the impact of the Mindway solution in terms of reducing gambling harm?
That's a really, really good question, right? And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into that, because what we're looking at here is something where there is no real true ground truth, right? It's always going to be subjective and there's always going to be an opinion. So we believe that the closest thing to getting that ground truth is always going to be the opinion of these sort of impartial experts who have done the research. They've worked with people for many, many years who have experienced the problem, And their assessment is always going to be something that is kind of, I would say, more solid than relying on, for example, we see a lot of operators that try to develop systems looking at things like self-reporting is problematic because human beings, you and I both know human beings, we're not necessarily aware of our own behavior at any one point in time. And even when we are potentially aware of it, we're not often sort of predisposed to being honest about what that behavior is. You know, you only have to think about when you go to the doctor and he'll ask you either how much exercise do you do or how many units of alcohol do you drink. I don't know about you, but if you listen, if you listen to my answers, I'd be a teetotaler and I'm training for the Olympics. It's not a true representation. So for that reason, we feel that this kind of third-party assessment is really, really important. So number one, you have to start with something that you're confident is going to give you as close to a ground truth as you can possibly get in this. The other bit around how do we then assess, actually, does the algorithm do what it's supposed to do? And are we making sure that the people that are being identified are the correct people? We believe very, very strongly at Mindway that we have to have a level of transparency. You know, we're dealing with a regulated industry, so we need to have that transparency as well. So we actually invited GLI to come in and do a third-party assessment on the accuracy of our algorithm, or I should actually say the efficacy of our algorithm, because these are two different things, right? And they actually came back with results that we were sort of, what we did with that assessment is we took a subset of player data, we got the human experts to mark that data, and we also ran the same data through the pre-trained game scanner algorithm and then sort of assessed the results. Is it bringing up the same thing as the human experts are? And they found that in at least 88% of cases, the game scanner algorithm came back with the same results as a human expert looking at that data. Now, you consider, Jim, you're never going to get 100%, obviously, because even human to human, there's going to be some disagreement on this. But AI is normally developed somewhere between 70 to 80% efficacy. So those numbers we were incredibly proud of. And I would say the other bit of evidence that we have around this is just working with the many customers that we work with and the phenomenal results that they've had since deploying the system in being able to identify players early as well. And that's really, really important because it's not just about your players that sit at the top of that pyramid in the high and very high risk category. It's about the players that are entering early risk, right? These guys are so important. Because if you can interact with them when you start to see early signs and you can start to sort of encourage not better, I don't want to use the word better, but sort of responsible behaviors that are going to help them manage their own gambling before it escalates, then that is the key. And that's what we're really trying to achieve here.
Yeah. And you mentioned it's something that is kind of interesting because you talk about the balance between human interception and technology and AI and algorithms. I think you sit in the middle of it, but what do you think is the optimal balance between technology and human translation into the issue?
Yeah, having a human in the loop is absolutely critical. You have to, right? You can't just rely on the machines to do all your decision making for you. So I often refer to it as HI, human intelligence. And I say that we bring...
I'm nicking that. I'm stealing that one.
You can have it. You can borrow it. It's fine. I say we sort of bring together this sort of combination of AI and HI. Obviously, there is absolutely no way you could have, no matter how big a team of human experts, you know, some of our customers have literally millions of active players on their platform. You know, there is no way in the world you could have humans looking at that data in real time 24/7. So using the technology to replicate that decision making is so important because it means you can scale and it means you can track every single player as an individual. But in terms of what you then do with that information, some of it, of course, can be automated in terms of interactions and should be, and you should make sure that you have those automations set up and in place. But other bits of it is about informing the decision-making of the human beings in the operator so that when they then go into a conversation with a player, they're talking to them about something the player can see themselves in. Now, this whole idea of being able to recognize your own behavior, bringing that behavior sort of to the forefront and understanding that behavior sits outside of what we would see as kind of a healthy pattern is really, really important. And I know we do quite a lot of work with the guys at Epic Global Solutions. I was using their old title there. But those guys are amazing. And about 50% of their business are people that have experienced gambling related harm in the past. So there's a lot of lived experience within that business. And I was talking to one of their guys, Dan Spencer, and he was basically saying to me that he feels that when he was sort of going through the time in his life where he was suffering with very, very severe gambling problems, if something like this had existed and somebody had been able to sort of sit him down and talk him through his behavior, and he would have sort of been able to understand that everybody isn't playing in the way that he was playing, that it would have really helped him. Because this whole idea of everybody plays like this, everybody does it, what I'm doing is not out of the ordinary, was something that was, quite at the forefront of this for him. So I think it's important, but it's a human issue, right? These are real people with real lives, and you can't address that entirely with tech. The tech is there to inform the decision making, to make sure that you've got a really good understanding of what is going on with that player. You've got some concrete things you can talk to them about, and you can really understand what areas you want to point different players in. So, for example, if you have a player who has a problem that is predominantly based around time consumption, talking to them about setting deposit limits, it's not going to help them really. So you need to understand that. You need to understand where the issue is with this player and focus in the help that you can give on that particular point.
When you were talking there just about sort of like people's experiences of gambling harm, where it affects families, it affects people's livelihoods, obviously it has a real human impact on many, many people. And it's clearly one of these things that when you start researching it and listening to these stories, it's heart-wrenching, it's emotional, and it really into the ethical code of AI and algorithms. And for me personally, I can say algorithm, I can say AI. I've got a mainstream understanding of it. Do you develop an ethical code when you're creating the AI or deploying this sort of technology?
Well, obviously there is regulation. The EU AI regulation came into force as well recently. So there is regulation that sits around this. And I think the key thing is about what you're using the technology for. So we at Mindway, we don't sort of have products in any other space than safer gambling. And we wouldn't sell the solution to any operator that would be using it for any other reason than safer gambling. And the detection that we have is very much set up around looking for these kind of markers that could indicate harm. But it is something, obviously, you've got to be incredibly mindful of, because, yeah, you're right, we're dealing with human beings, we're dealing with people. It is an incredibly emotive subject, and it's something that is incredibly important that you do get right, definitely.
Okay, so we, as I said, and you've clearly evidenced that you're on the side of good for AI within the gambling industry, which, we're super grateful for. Are you aware of instances and deployments of AI and technology on the other side, on the bad side, that would increase potential gambling harm?
I mean, I'm not sure that I would call it the bad side, right? What I would say is that this industry is a regulated industry. It's a business that, like any other, is a perfectly legitimate business. It employs a lot of people across the world, and we make a lot of tax revenue out of the gambling industry. So I think this idea of sort of good and evil, like, it's a really good hook, but is it the reality? I don't know. I mean, obviously we know that operators have used AI in marketing solutions for a very long time and continue to do so. Do I have an issue with that? I don't think I do. So long as those operators are also utilizing the technology to properly understand their player base. And I work with a number of different customers where the conversation has been around the lines of that, we want to join all of this up. We want to be able to look at our marketing through a lens of risk. We want to understand that players that have a certain level of risk, or maybe have a problem even with a certain product set, that we're not sending marketing to them that could be problematic. So whilst, for example, it might still be fine to send stuff to somebody around sportsbook because they have no issues when they're predominantly gambling on sports, we want to stop any marketing on slots to that player, because that's when we start to see that player's risk score rising. So I think it's about taking a joined up approach to actually understanding who your players are, understanding what their behaviour patterns are across the whole piece, deploying that across the whole business. We have a lot of operators that want to do that. I'm sure there are still some around that will use the technology to sort of not take the risk level into consideration, but then they're not going to be the operators that are going to break bread with me, are they, Jim? Because that's kind of, it sort of goes against what we're doing as a business. So it's not something I come into contact with a lot. I do come into contact a lot with operators that are wanting to understand this and do it in a really ethical way, though.
That's something that I'm sort of really pleased to hear. I'm pro-gambling, I'm not a prohibitionist, and I think we're on the same page just in terms of sort of safety and the responsible play element of it. I'm more concerned about whether people outside of the operators and the platforms would have access to technology that could incur further gambling harm, or it might be around issues such as KYC and AML.
Yeah, and AML is something that we're interested in. We're actually launching an AML module at the end of Q1 this year. So, the two go hand in hand, don't they? There's like two sides of one coin, safer gambling and AML. So I think it's important. And I think to answer your question, there are always going to be bad operators. And I think that people talk about this a lot in relation to AI, but it's the same with any technology that has ever been available to us as human beings. There are going to be people that use it and develop it for good purposes, and there are going to be people that use it and develop it for fraudulent purposes, or to capitalize in ways that maybe we wouldn't deem ethical. I think so long as the good operators are keeping pace, right? And by operators, I mean suppliers. I don't mean gambling operators. And that we are developing and understanding what we can do. I think that's what we can do. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? It's out. People are going to be developing solutions. People are going to be using this technology. We see a lot in the media about sort of AI being used for fraud. It's going to happen. I know a while back there was a letter signed by a lot of sort of tech entrepreneurs saying that we should put a halt on development of AI. That's all very well and good, but anybody who's signing that letter and the good operators, if they put a halt on it, the bad operators aren't going to halt. They're going to continue. And all that would happen is that they would get ahead of the game. So I think we've just got to keep speed. We've got to keep pace, and we've got to make sure that the regulation is in place and the transparency is in place, and really just take it from there. But in terms of the tech, like every technology that has ever existed, people have said, this is going to be the end of the earth, right?
I just don't know for a fact. It's one of these ones. I don't know whether it's because I'm getting older, but when email first came into the office and everyone's like, email's going to save you so much time, the internet's going to save you so much time. And there's not been a technology that's actually saved time in the sort of 25 odd years that I've been in. It's always ended up sort of creating more work for me.
They didn't factor in the falling down the Wikipedia rabbit hole, no?
That's exactly that. But also, you sort of like, when you were just talking there, remember that letter that the tech leaders were signing, and it's this catastrophizing and this doom reading of any impending tech that's coming down the line. And I think we discussed it earlier about how AI was machine learning, was big data, and it's just evolving. But when the big headlines start coming in and go into the mainstream, that's when people start there going, it's going to be rules that are triggered by hypersonic missiles based on, gameplay of a big computer. And that's essentially what worries people, isn't it?
It's like science fiction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've got like a perfect storm here, right? Because we've got all of that sort of public worry around technology and what is happening with AI. And then we have this very emotive situation that we see that, a lot of reporting that is very, very one-sided, I would say, in the mainstream media around the gambling industry as well. So bringing those two things together, you've got the perfect public outrage. I can definitely see why people would have a level of concern around it. But I think if people sort of started to understand the applications and what it can actually be used for, and understand that actually what we're talking about here is fundamentally a data-driven approach to enabling people to have the information they need to act in a timely way, something that actually genuinely does save time. You look at something like Game Scanner Analytics, you can run information on there and reports and understanding of what's going on with your player database that you would need a load of data scientists to pull together without something like this. And you can literally run it at the click of a button. It definitely does save time. It's then making sure that the information is utilized in a way that is actually going to be helpful for the players and for the operators as well. And that, in my view, is a training exercise. It's an education exercise. It's working with the wider safer gambling community to sort of lift levels and understanding of what safer gambling actually is and what positive play looks like, and enabling operators to then be able to educate their player base as to controls that they can put around their own accounts and things that they can do to play in a way that is going to be sort of leaving them less susceptible to developing a problem down the line.
So just moving it on, and obviously, but continuing on that same theme of just being a sensible conversation that we're having today about AI. What do you see as sort of like the feasible things and the evolution and the challenges that would happen with regard to AI and gambling in the next, I don't want to say 12, I know we're at the turn of the year, I don't want to say 12 months because it's just a time frame, just over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so I'm going to focus in on sort of the safer gambling side because that's obviously where my knowledge sits. So I think the next piece of the puzzle for us, I think in terms of detection, we are getting pretty strong, right? We're incredibly strong, and it's something that we are able to do and identifying those players. I think the next piece of the puzzle then sits around the whole intervention piece and what we do with that information. So we've got a lot of sort of projects on the way in our pipeline where we're looking at, well, could we take that idea of an expert opinion, and could we take it one step further? Could we take it to a point that rather than just getting sort of an expert opinion on where the players sit in terms of level of risk, that we then are able to train algorithms to understand what the expert would then suggest might be the best next course of action with that player. So I think that's one area that is like super interesting. We then also, we released last year, so it's not sort of moving forward, but it's something that, like with any technology, you develop, you release, you develop, it's an iterative process. But one of the key problems that our operators, especially in the UK, were dealing with was, I'm sure you remember a while back, the UK GC came back with a requirement that you needed to identify, you needed to act, and then you needed to evaluate the efficacy of those actions. And a lot of the operators that we work with, the biggest issue they had around that was, number one, evidencing the efficacy. And number two, how do we measure efficacy? Because we go back to what we were talking about at the beginning. There's no kind of ground zero on this. So what we did is we developed like a supplementary model that looks at short-term play, and we call it our intensity model. So you would absolutely expect if you carry out an interaction, you would expect to see a change in their gameplay following that interaction, or you would hope to see a change in their gameplay following that interaction. But obviously, if somebody's play becomes more controlled in the immediate days following the interaction, you need to also see a level of consistency for that to have any kind of impact on their overall risk assessment, right? Because just because you've had one good day, it doesn't mean that, oh, that's it, you're fine now. But it does mean that if you can understand the impact that interaction has had on immediate gameplay, then you can make decisions about what the next best thing to do with that player is. So you have your interaction, you see more controlled play in the immediate time after the interaction. You might say, okay, I'm going to put this player for follow-up. I'm going to watch and see what happens with them over the next however many days, okay? If you don't see more controlled behavior following the interaction, you might want to escalate it to another interaction. And, you might want to, if the interaction had been an automated interaction, you might want to get one of your safer gambling team to actually reach out to this player, for example. So being able to assess the immediate impact of interactions and then act on it, I think that's one thing that's super important, and that we are seeing our operators do. And we've actually got a new release of the game. I'm giving you a little sort of a preview here, but we've got a new release of the Game Scanner player profiles that we're going to be releasing at ICE, that people will then be able to map this within the graph so that the operatives can see it really, really sort of like that straight away. And then taking that forward onto what else can we do? What else can we do around understanding what kind of interactions work for what kind of players, getting the experts to inform those interactions a little bit. Obviously, like with anything, like back to the days when Kim was working in diagnostics, the idea was that the AI technology could look at a lot of different brain scans and could bring back information for the doctors very, very quickly so that they can make a quick decision around what to do with this patient. Everybody knows when you have a stroke, time is the single most important thing in the equation. It's about enabling to make that decision. It's exactly the same here, right? We're not saying the AI takes over the decision-making process. We're saying that we train the algorithm in a way that it understands that player, it understands that player behavior. The experts have been able to inform, this is what I would suggest would be the next step with this player. The human being then assesses, do I agree with this assessment? You don't just follow it blindly. So I think we'll see that. I think we'll see a lot more of a joined up approach that we were talking about previously across all of business, rather than it just being something that sort of sits over there with your safer gambling team. And the research is just growing in this space. So if you ask me this probably in 6 months' time, I might give you another answer as well. But those are the areas that I think we're certainly focusing on as a business.
It just reminded me when you were answering that question there about that AI meme about AI won't take your job, it'll be the person that understands how to use AI. I kind of get that's where you're coming from.
Jim, I did a panel at Sigma this year, and the panel turned into basically, it was brilliant. I loved it, and we had a great time. But it basically turned into a debate as to, is AI going to take our jobs? And I sit very, very firmly on the side that it might change our jobs, but it's not going to take them away. And again, I would always bring that back to any technology. You know, go back to the Industrial Revolution and the machinery that was developed there. It changed the roles and it changed the jobs, but it didn't mean that human beings were all of a sudden redundant, did it? And I think
think we're in that sort of like tipping point with regard to how people admit to how they use AI. I mean, everyone, I know ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini are just sort of like one examples of AI, but you know, some people won't happily admit to using it to craft an email that they don't want to write or spend a lot of time with, and just using it to edit it down in order to make use of it. And I just think that's how it's going.
I would add to that I think also we all use AI all the time and aren't necessarily aware that we're using it all the time. So what do we think our Spotify daily mix is, right? Where's that come from? You know, there's so many applications of AI that we're all using, and we're not even aware that that's what we're doing.
Just to sort of this episode up, you did touch on one element that I'm really, really interested in, and that's with regards to the Gambling Commission and regulators. The speed of technology and the rate at which it develops is obviously a lot harder for the regulatory bodies to keep up with, just in terms of defining the parameters of what's acceptable, what sort of guidance both creators and operators and platforms should be using. Are you working quite closely with regulatory bodies, specifically in the UK, and who else is working with them in order to give them guidance to help them create the best code of conduct?
So I'm very optimistic about regulators at the moment, and regulators, a lot of different regulators internationally that are definitely sort of engaging with the suppliers in this space and wanting to understand the capabilities of the technology that does exist in this space. We've announced publicly, so I can say this, we have an ongoing project with the Greek regulator. We also have on our board Birgitta Sand, who is for 12 years, she was the Director General of the Danish, I think maybe even more than 12 years, the Director General of the Danish Regulatory Authority. We've been working very, very closely with regulators that are establishing requirements in new and upcoming markets. We also do have some dialogue with the UKGC. I've demoed the solution to some of their team there. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. And I think that there is an appetite, definitely an appetite for them to engage with this and understand it. And I think that the driver for that appetite is that they want to be in the loop and in the understanding. I have previously said on panels that I'd done sort of in the distant past that I felt it was really, really important for regulators to engage with this. And maybe if you'd asked me that question 18 months ago, I would have been sort of on a soapbox pushing for more engagement. I think that engagement is happening now. And for me, I'm very, very happy about that. I think it's a very good thing because I think there is a real need for the people that are setting the regulation in this industry and that are assessing how well operators are compliant to that regulation to be in the loop and understand. And I think it's very, very hard. And I'd take the UK as an example. When you are against a backdrop of everything that is reported publicly being negative, it is very, very hard to then be objective about what is happening in the industry. But my perception, what I see with the operators we work with, is a lot of people that really care about what they're doing, a lot of innovation going on, and a real drive to excel and exceed in this space. So it's great to have the regulators understanding that exists as well. I understand why the papers don't report on it. It wouldn't make a very good news story, right? Gambling regulator is protecting players and achieves. Nobody's going to be interested in that. So I do understand why it's one-sided, what we see. But I also think we have to be objective about it and we have to listen to voices from all sides of the equation. The fact that the regulators do engage now and that they are interested in the tech, they are interested in what we do, is a very, very positive and relatively new movement in this space, I'd say.
I'll tell you, I think that feels like the perfect point to conclude this episode, just on that positivity thing, because I completely agree with you. Whenever you're talking about sort of like headlines or clickbait or social media narrative around AI and particularly gambling, it can be divisive, it can be, catastrophizing, and just to understand that the core interpretation of how the industry is moving in a sensible, in a measured way with AI, I just think is really encouraging and almost sort of like pours scorn on my good versus evil narrative at the beginning. But
sorry, Jim,
you've won me round. There are good players in this industry. There's people that are, looking out for player protection to protect people against gambling harm. And I think that is, a really, really good viewpoint and a great insight. So thanks a million for that input and for that insight on Mindway. I know I didn't mention it at the beginning either, but you were voted by an award at the end of last year as Networking Ninja for the industry. I can see why. You've got so much insight. For anyone who's watching this episode, how's the best way to contact you?
Obviously, I'll be at ICE, so drop by the stand there. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn, or my details are on the Mindway website, but definitely do reach out. I'm always happy to talk to people, and always happy, whatever level the conversation is at. I think the more of us that get involved in this and the more people that work together on the side of actually promoting safer gambling, the better. So yeah, please do. And thanks for mentioning that. I was very touched. I woke up on one morning and I turned on LinkedIn and I saw that. I wasn't expecting it, but it was very nice to receive it.
Well, what I'll do is I'll put all of those links in the show notes and in all of the captions for this episode on whatever platform it appears. And hopefully you can look to be, as the reigning champion and award winner, maybe go for 2 years in a row in terms of getting... Listen, thanks again for joining me, Paula. It'll be great to get you up on the show, maybe in 6 months' time or a year's time, just to sort of like recap on what we discussed and to see how things have developed. But I'd just like to take this opportunity again to thank you for your time and, wish you all the best at ICE and for 2025.
Thanks, Jim. You too. Thanks for having me.